Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to SCO's July webinar on preparing for the OAT. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all are staying safe and healthy. My name is Avery Cunningham. I am a Student Services and Admissions Officer here at SCO. I am one of the admissions team members who will be answering your admissions questions and participating with you in the admissions process. Before we get started, I ask that we all use proper Zoom etiquette by keeping microphones muted unless speaking, limiting background noise, and respecting all of this webinar's attendees and facilitators. We will have time for questions towards the end of the webinar, but in the meantime, if you do have any questions or concerns that need immediate attention, please use your chat feature to communicate with us. You should be able to access the chat feature at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen, depending on how your screen is formatted. Today, we'll be discussing the OAT, possibly the most important exam for any student considering a career in optometry. We will open this webinar with a general overview about the OAT and the registration process, when you should take the exam, how to prepare for the exam, what resources are available to you, how to wrap your mind around the day of the test, and then end with a Q&A. Now, a quick disclaimer, I myself am not an optometrist. I have never attended optometry school, nor have I ever taken the OAT. This information about the exam is based on research, professional experience, and advice from current and previous optometry students. So just something to be aware of as we go forward. And I see we have a question coming in from Lexia Martinez. If you have any issues hearing me or seeing the screen, also please let me know as well in the chat. Yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be free and available to view starting later this week on our website. Alrighty then, and we'll go ahead and get started. So what is the OAT? In a very general sense, the OAT stands for the Optometry Admissions Test. It is a standardized exam sponsored by the Association of Schools and Colleges of Optometry, and it is required of all students seeking admission into optometry school, with some exceptions, which we'll get into in a little bit. Generally, the OAT provides or shows aptitude for the basic sciences, how capable a student may be of excelling in optometry school coursework, and the kind of skills that a student may have that would make them a perfect fit for a future optometrist. As with all standardized tests, this is more or less a general type of assessment, but for us at SCO and for optometry schools all over the country, it provides a really wonderful groundwork for how we can assess a student's capabilities going into a professional school program. The OAT provides standardized measurement for optometry school applicants, although more schools of optometry are accepting MCAT and/or GRE scores in lieu of the OAT, or are considering applications without standardized tests altogether. Now, talking about SCO's policy around alternative exams, our preference has always been and will most likely always be for the OAT. We think, as I've said, that is the best measurement that we can have of a student's aptitude for a professional school optometry program. However, we of course understand that there may be students who have already taken the MCAT or have already taken the GRE and are debating whether or not they want to proceed with the preparedness and the time and the cost it would mean to invest to prepare for the OAT. So what I will say is that we will consider MCAT or GRE scores, but only under some really more or less strict reservations. One, those MCAT or GRE scores need to be pretty competitive. We're talking in the top percentile. Also, that needs to be in correlation with a strong GPA. If you have a high GRE score, for example, but a lower GPA, then we might still recommend that you pursue the OAT. Also, we will always consider the OAT before we consider an MCAT or a GRE score. So this type of arrangement is really best for those who already have an MCAT or GRE score under your belt. If you have an OAT score and an MCAT score, for example, we are going to place preference on the OAT score before we even consider the MCAT score. So my recommendation to students always is to at least consider seriously taking the OAT, even if you have an MCAT or GRE score. There's always a chance that the admissions committee will ask you to take the OAT, even if your scores are relatively competitive. But if you have a specific situation, please reach out to us and explain, and we can give you some more personalized feedback. The OAT is accepted by all 25 optometry schools in the US and those in Canada, and it is mainly used to assess someone's reasoning, critical thinking, reading comprehension, data analysis, and problem-solving skills. Truly, it tests the ability to think analytically and approach a broad range of scientific concepts, which is just as important as the ability to regurgitate information and perform well on a test. As I'm sure all of you know, when it comes to medical practitioners, it's really best that you be able to take what you know and apply it to practical, real-time, varied situations, as opposed to just one's ability to express what they know in a test format. And the OAT can be a really crucial first step in testing and assessing that student's aptitude in the ability to approach really high-level concepts in a more practical way. So here on the screen is an OAT breakdown. Now, I know you're looking at this and you're thinking that's a lot of questions with a lot of possible answers, and I can't possibly know every answer to every question. Well, there is no penalty for guessing when it comes to the OAT. It is always in your best interest to answer every question before time runs out, even if you're not 100% sure if your answer that you choose is ultimately the correct one. It is always in your best interest to go ahead and answer every single question. Now we're going to get into a little bit more detail in the breakdown section by section of the OAT. Before starting that, it's important to note that there are two optional sections of the OAT. One is an optional tutorial at the beginning of the exam, and then one is an optional post-test survey at the end of the exam. Again, these are optional. You are not required to participate in these optional sessions, although I do recommend going ahead and participating in the optional tutorial. This can be helpful just to alleviate any anxieties you may have about how to use the testing center, how to use the computer, how to answer certain questions. Even if you feel really confident that you've done a lot of prep and a lot of research, it's always good just for a last minute reminder of the practicalities of taking the exam. So I always recommend at least doing the optional tutorial for the first 15 minutes. Now we're going to get into the Survey of Natural Sciences, which is by and large the largest section of the OAT, with 3 individual topics or subjects within the Survey of Natural Sciences, starting with biology, which covers 40 questions. Now, biology is a broad subject, so study broadly. In the past, students have assumed that because this exam is for a medical profession, that all of the biology questions are going to be focused on anatomy and physiology or human biology, and that's certainly not the case. The biology section can cover a wide range of subtopics, from cellular and molecular biology to diversity of life, to genetics, to evolution, to developmental biology, of course, anatomy and physiology, and everything in between. So it's important not to really get pigeonholed into the idea that because this is an OAT exam, that the questions can only cover a very select number of topics. When approaching biology, try to have as broad an understanding of the subject as a whole as you can. Of course, as I said previously, you can't expect to know every answer to every question, but when you're approaching your preparation time, trying to plan out as broad an overview as possible will really be more of a help than a hindrance when you're going into the exam. The next section in the Survey of Natural Sciences is general chemistry. This will involve more calculations than biology and therefore more time and scratch work. The scratch work portion is really important to consider because sometimes students will, when preparing for the OAT, they'll just take subject tests as part of their prep. They won't sit down and do a full practice test. And when you're not doing a full practice test, you don't always account for the actual time you're going to spend on something like scratch work. It's really easy to get caught off guard by the time allotment when you're not accounting in your prep for however long it will take you to do different scratch work and work through different calculations. So when you are preparing for the exam, please take that into consideration just so it doesn't catch you off guard when it comes to the actual time test. As you'll see with all of these questions within the Survey of Natural Sciences, you only have 90 minutes. So it's really important to be very aware of your time as you're preparing for the exam so it doesn't catch you off guard during the actual test. And the last section of the survey of natural sciences is organic chemistry. These questions are going to involve drawing out reactions, complex figures, and naming or identifying molecules. The next section will be reading comprehension. That'll be 50 questions that'll take you, or that you have about 60 minutes to an hour to complete. You will read 3 passages, 16 to 17 questions per passage. And the key skills tested here will be finding the main idea, processing information, and your ability to read and understand dense passages in a relatively short amount of time. Now, some individuals will look at the reading comprehension section and think, oh, that's easy. That's just testing your ability to have critical thinking skills and identify context clues. You know, I don't need to prepare for that. That's going to be an easy subject. That is not always the case. In many instances, I've interviewed students who do wonderfully on physics, biology, quantitative reasoning, these higher level science courses, but their score really is negatively impacted by their lack of preparation they did for reading comprehension. Don't assume just because you feel, proficient in English or literary understanding or your ability to comprehend diverse or dense text that you don't need to prepare for reading comprehension. Please be sure to incorporate this section into your prep materials and your prep schedule, because several students can be caught off guard by just how unprepared they are for this section if they don't do, the basic work to familiarize themselves with it. There is a break of 30 minutes right in the middle of the exam. It is optional, so if you want to just power on through, you can. But more than not, I've seen students go ahead and take the break just as a chance to kind of resettle themselves, especially if they have any nerves coming out of those first couple of sections. And honestly, I would think that you would need that 30-minute break before going into the physics section, which is overwhelmingly considered to be the most difficult section of the OAT. When we see students who have lower scores, even though the rest of their OAT results are relatively high, those lower scores are coming from the physics section. So it's really important to take this section seriously because it takes you seriously. Physics is like biology in the sense that it is tested broadly, so study broadly. So often I have spoken to students who said they assume that the physics section would just cover optics. That is certainly not the case. Even though, yes, optics is one of the foundational aspects of optometry that you need to understand to do well in this program and really to do well as a doctor, that does not mean that it's going to be the only physics section covered in the OAT. Testing broadly and having as wide an understanding of the subject matter as you can will be in your best interest. It'll be equal parts theory and equal parts command of math / problem solving skills. So feel as comfortable as you can in both sections or both kind of ideations of physics when you're going into prep for this exam. It's really important to not underestimate the physics section. And then finally, quantitative reasoning. The key skills tested here will be mathematics proficiency and more problem solving skills. So you can expect to see in quantitative reasoning all of your greatest hits of mathematics: algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, word problems, all that therein. And again, it's important to take a section like quantitative reasoning seriously. You may feel very confident in math, but there may be some trigonometry theories that you haven't reviewed since you were a freshman. You're taking this exam as a senior. It's just important to review all subjects when preparing for the OAT. Don't assume that just because you feel really confident or you felt confident in one section or one subject 3 years ago, that's automatically going to translate into a high score on the exam. So the total you're looking at is 230 questions for the entire exam, with, if you include all of the optional allotments, 5 hours, 5 minutes for the entire experience. That's a very long exam. That's a very long day. But it's important to kind of have that number in your mind that you can kind of wrap your head around, again, so you're not caught off guard or overwhelmed by just how big of an exam this is. Alrighty. On to the next section, talking about what it means to be competitive. On the screen before you, you're seeing a breakdown over the past 10 years or so of the number of applicants we've had versus the number of enrollments and what their average GPA and their average OAT is. This can give you a really clear sense of the kind of trajectory that we see and really what we expect of current, future incoming classes. The test is graded on a 200 to 400 point scale, 1 grade for each section, and then a total science grade and an academic average. SCO, we try to stay very holistic when making admissions decisions. Students are assessed based on their whole application, not just their test scores. However, it is important to take that OAT score seriously and give yourself at least a baseline of what you would consider to be a competitive application or a competitive score. 320 and up is nationally considered to be a competitive score on the OAT. As you can see with our average OAT per entering class, the trajectory has been shifting a little bit more towards 330 to even 340 if you're looking at a class like 2021 and what their average OAT score was. Use these averages of previous years as a guide for where your OAT scores need to fall in order for your application to be considered competitive. But also, please be aware that these are averages. We don't hold a strict standard where we say everyone with this and above is in and everyone with this and below is out. But if you are trying to give yourself, something to reach for, something to aspire towards, then looking at these averages from the past years can give you a much better understanding of what the total makeup of the entering class might be. Also, something to be aware of is that if you're scoring below 300 on the OAT, more often than not, we're going to recommend a retake. Now, that is not always the case. That is more of a case-by-case situation. But if you are trying to, again, give yourself kind of a baseline to aim for, we would recommend that you look into retaking the OAT if you're scoring below a 300, but always feel comfortable reaching out to us and we will discuss your situation with you personally. Alrighty. And if you hear any panting going on in the background, my very large dog is upset about this heat. I'm upset about it as well. So you might hear some panting in the background as we continue. Now, talking about when you should take the OAT. The first question is, when do you plan on applying? Most students take the OAT the summer after their junior year. And I mean, students who are in a traditional, 4-year program. If you're someone who has been out of undergrad for a while, or you're in professional school, or you're a professional adult at this point, then that might look a little bit different for you. But for students who are on that 4-year program path, they'll take the OAT the summer between their junior and senior year. We recommend giving yourself 3 months to study. So considering all of those specifications, that is when you can kind of plan out when you want to apply, or at least submit your application for optometry school. If you want to, have your application ready to go right when the application opens in the summer, then you may be wanting to take your OAT as early as March, April, or May, which means that you would be preparing for the OAT starting maybe even in January or December. If you need to give yourself a little bit more time and you say, okay, I think I want to feel comfortable submitting my application in November, then you may be taking the OAT in September, for example. So it's really important to kind of know when your ideal time to submit the OAT or submit your application will be, and that can help you really plan out when to take the exam. Excuse me 1 minute, I'm going to take a sip of water. Grizzly, stop. Alrighty, okay. So also a question you need to ask yourself is, have you finished relevant prerequisite courses? We recommend taking at least introductory level courses of the courses tested on the exam prior to taking the exam itself. For example, it would be a bit of a disadvantage to take the physics section of the OAT before taking at least a introductory level physics course in a collegiate environment. It's a really big ask to try to learn all that is needed for the physics section of the OAT with just OAT prep materials. So that can also really influence when you're planning to take the OAT. If you haven't taken an introductory level physics course yet, or organic chemistry or biology courses yet, then that is going to influence when the best time for you personally will take the exam. And that may change your schedule a little bit. Also ask yourself, when will you have time to study? And ask yourself this question seriously. Be honest with yourself and your schedule. Studying for the OAT is an intensive process that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy. Attempting to juggle too much can cause more harm than good. I've seen several situations with students where they attempt to take the OAT or study for the OAT, I should say, while they're doing a full course load, while they're also working part-time, while they're president of their school's pre-optometry program, and it all can just become really overwhelming. And they end up having to retake the exam because their scores aren't ultimately what they would want them to be. So really ask yourself, when will you have time to study? And be very honest. You don't want to, in essence, almost sabotage your test by trying to take on too much at once. That is why a lot of students end up taking the exam in the summer, in between semesters, when they'll have a lot more time to just focus on the OAT. Also be aware of when applications open and close. For SCO, our application for this cycle opens on, or has opened, excuse me, June 26th and closes on March 1st. Now, please be aware that SCO is a rolling admissions institution. Your personal application deadline should be June 26th if you want to be at the beginning of the process, not March 1st. Now, we will review every application we receive that is eligible all the way up until March 1st. But if you're waiting until the very, very, very end of the application deadline to submit your application, it's going to be a lot more competitive. Personally, what I advise students is that they have their applications submitted by or before the holidays. For me, the holidays start with Halloween, but for you, the holidays might start with Thanksgiving. So around that time, I would consider to be the best period of time to have your application submitted. Once you get into the Christmas season and the new year, it's going to become just more and more competitive as we get closer to the application deadline. Now, the process of applying to take the OAT, and you may think, well, that sounds very odd. You have to apply to take the exam. That's just a kind of term that they use interchangeably for registering to take the OAT. There are some things that you have to be approved of when you're taking the OAT. For example, if you've taken the OAT 3 times already, then you have to get almost like a special dispensation to take it a 4th time. So that's kind of what leans into the term applying to take the OAT, but really you're just registering to take the exam. So on the screen before you can see the link to where you can go and register to take the OAT, or you can just simply Google apply to take the OAT, and it should take you directly to ada.org to submit your registration. You have to request a PIN first to apply, and that PIN will be used to help identify you throughout the OAT process. So that is a number that's really important to keep track of as you go through kind of the OAT registration process and the application process. You will be required to read the 2025 OAT guide before registering to take the exam, which thoroughly lists the topics in each section and goes over the administrative procedures. The OAT guide may seem like just a big book of terms and conditions when you're first asked to read it, but please, I highly recommend taking a nice close look at the OAT guide. In fact, the OAT guide was very helpful for us when we were putting together this webinar. So even though it's required to read, don't just click and say that I've read it when you haven't. Really take some time to review it when you're going through the registration process. The cost to take the OAT is expensive and has been going up in small ways year over year. The current cost to register to take the OAT is $520 with a fee to, excuse me, $520 with a fee to reschedule that ranges from $40 to $150, depending on how far out you're wanting to reschedule. Fee waivers are available on a first come, first served basis starting in January. Candidates who qualify for a fee waiver must demonstrate financial hardship, prove that this is their first time taking the OAT, be a U.S. citizen or foreign national, receive financial aid at their educational institution, and must submit a fee waiver with financial information and education institution financial aid award letter. So there are a lot of steps to go through to get a fee waiver for the OAT. It is possible though. So if you know that that is something that you would be eligible for and want to apply for, plan to go ahead and get all those materials together as early as possible, since there are a lot of hoops to jump through. Excuse me. So talking about real quickly accommodations requests. If you are somebody with a documented disability or a medical/mental condition, as described in the Americans with Disabilities Act, you are able to submit an accommodations request. Like with the waiver for the OAT fee, there are a few hoops to jump through with the accommodations request. You must download, complete, and submit a request form before scheduling your test, and also submit an evaluation report from an appropriate healthcare professional and documentation of previous accommodations that you've received. So again, if you know that this is something that applies to you, if you know that you've been granted accommodations before in the past with other exams and you would like an accommodation for this test, be sure to get your materials together as soon as possible, just to be sure that there's no roadblocks to getting everything approved. And then talking about the Prometric Test Center. This test is taken via a computer at the Prometric Testing Center, or at a Prometric Testing Center, which are all throughout the country. After your application and fee are processed, you will receive instructions on how to contact Prometric and arrange a date, time, and location for your test. Try to schedule your test about 60 to 90 days in advance. For example, if you want to take the exam in June, register to take it in March. And finally, this is a test that is held throughout the year all over the country. You can schedule to take the OAT at any time. It is not only held at specific times of year, specific locations. It is available constantly, so that can also help with when you want to plan to take the exam. So preparing for the OAT, there's only so much you can really do to properly prepare yourself for the exam, and every person's situation is a little bit different, but we do want to give you some quick pieces of advice that our students have found helpful when preparing for this exam. Excuse me one second. Starting with, don't regurgitate, remember and retain. This is not the type of exam that you cram for. It's not the type of exam that you say, well, I think I'll take about 2 weeks to study and I should be good to go. This is not that exam. Again, give yourself at least 3 months to study prior to taking the exam. And when we say 3 months, really give yourself those 3 months, not 3 months that actually turns into 1.5 months. Really work that prep into your schedule. Often students will make their prep a part of their regularly routine day. They'll block off an hour, 2 hours, even 3 hours from their mornings or afternoons or evenings just to prepare for the exam. And that type of dedication and routine is really helpful to ensure that you're not finding yourself a week before the exam trying to cram as much as possible. Also be aware that an A in the course does not mean a perfect score on the exam. Just because you did really well in your biology course does not automatically mean that you do not have to prepare for the OAT and don't have to do any prep. Do not take this test for granted and do not underestimate this exam. Prepare for everything, review all subjects, even if you feel really confident, that's great. Doing the proper prep work is only going to help you feel more confident and more assured as you go into the exam. Create and maintain a habit of review. It's never too early to start preparing for the OAT. Even if you're currently a freshman and you're taking your first biology course, this can be a great time to start working that prep little by little into your daily, weekly routine. Start to really figure out how you study. Do you prefer to work alone or in groups? Are you a visual or practical learner? How much time do you reasonably need to study for any type of exam? These will all help the process of preparing for the OAT feel a lot more manageable and a lot more approachable. If you're taking these little tiny steps as you go along to really understand what type of learner you are and what the best learning environment is for you. Create a study group with other pre-optometry students. I've heard from a lot of optometry or prospective optometry students that when they were approaching the OAT, it maybe wasn't as prevalent on their campus as, say, the MCAT. You know, if you have a school with hundreds and hundreds of med students. They're all preparing for the MCAT at the same time. It feels very much like a community, where for pre-optometry students, they may feel a bit more isolated when preparing for the OAT. It doesn't feel like that there's this huge community that they can lean on. So take that initiative, reach out to other students who you know are preparing for optometry school, other students in your pre-optometry clubs. Build a community of prep around you. This will help the entire process feel a lot more approachable, a lot easier, and a lot more comfortable, as opposed to just isolating yourself and almost creating this environment where you're the only person in the world who's studying for this exam. Find the people who are going through this with you so you can lean on each other. And review your notes from relevant courses. It's always great to go back and kind of remind yourself of what you already know before going into kind of a prep environment. And one of the best ways to do that is review the courses, review your notes from those courses. So please hold on to all of your notes and also talk to your professors. One thing we always recommend for students is that if there was a course, like say you didn't do well in your Physics 2 course, go back to your professor, sit down with them and say, you know, I'm preparing to take the OAT. Can you help me understand what I wasn't understanding then, so I can kind of fill those gaps as I prepare for the exam. So reach back out to your professors, tell them what your plans are, what you're preparing for, and more often than not, they'll be happy to help you fill in those gaps. On the screen, you'll see some just very general study guides and resources that our students have found helpful, starting with the Kaplan review, of course, the kind of an old standard, but more often students are realizing that Kaplan is maybe a little bit too, how to say, inflexible for some students. If you're someone who doesn't do well with getting a really big book of prep and sitting down and working through, you know, 1,000 pages of review, then there are a lot more options for you for a more personalized study experience, like OAT Destroyer, OAT Booster, OAT Bootcamp is something that's become more popular. Those are very visual forms of prep, so they can make the process a little bit more engaging, a little bit more interactive. Chad's videos is also an excellent resource. It is an online lecture series where you can pay either individually or in bulk, I believe. There's a discount if you buy in bulk for different kind of lectures that are taken from semester-long courses, and they may be shortened down to maybe a week's worth of lectures on everything from biochemistry to organic chemistry, physics, biology, chemistry. If you have not taken some of these courses in a long time, then Chad's videos can be a great way to just reintroduce you to the subject matter as part of your kind of prep routine. Alrighty, the OAT, the day of. So these are just some quick pieces of advice that we have found that students really benefit from when they're kind of wrapping their mind around how to prepare for the day of the exam. First off, report at least 30 minutes early. If possible, visit the testing site the day before to ensure that you're able to locate it and to determine how long it will take you to get there. Like I have certainly experienced, and I'm sure many of you have, waking up and saying, okay, time to go where I need to go. You put the address into your Google Maps, and turns out it's an hour away when you were only planning for it to be 30 minutes away. You do not want this to be you on the morning of the OAT exam. So I always recommend, if you can, the day before, find where you're going. If you can't go there physically, at least map it out ahead of time so you can be assured that you know exactly how long it's going to take you to get there. Also have any transportation needs confirmed and prepared. This is not the morning to try to reach out to someone and be like, hey, can you give me a ride? If you know you'll be needing a ride, either plan for it very far in advance or make other arrangements so you're not kind of surprised by any fall through that happens with transportation. You'll be required to bring 2 forms of identification, such as a driver's license, passport, social security card, credit card, debit card, or a library card. Ensure that your name on your OAT application matches the name on your IDs exactly. This has been a roadblock for some students where they've been actually turned away from the testing center if the name on your OAT registration does not match the name on your identification. They will not allow you to take the exam. So please be sure that those match up, really that they match up while you're registering to take the exam. So this is not something that you'll have to deal with the day of. Biometric data may be collected, so that's something to be prepared for, which is a photograph or a fingerprint. I don't believe fingerprinting is quite as prevalent, but photographing is definitely something that you should expect. You'll be asked to store your personal items in a locker. I should say, provided items are not going to be allowed into the center. So things like your phone, any food or beverages, writing utensils, wallets, keys, etc., purses, all of those are going to be stored in a personal items locker for the duration of the exam. And then finally, you will be given note boards, markers, and possibly a basic calculator. So when you're doing your prep, kind of go ahead and plan and be aware that these are items that will be provided to you. So after the test, unofficial scores will be available automatically. And for many students, this is very, very disorienting. As soon as you answer that last question on the exam, within seconds, really, your score will appear. Again, this can be very disorienting for some students. You kind of prepare yourself to wait to know what your score is, but instead it is right there in front of you. And that can be great in the sense that you don't have to play the waiting game, but it also can be really assaulting because then you have to kind of be face to face with your score as soon as you finish. Those unofficial scores, again, will be available as soon as you complete the exam, while your official scores will be sent to schools within 3 to 4 weeks of you taking the test. We recommend that you go ahead and submit your unofficial scores to us here at SCO in advance of the official scores, even though we won't be able to invite you for an interview without your official scores. These at least will help us have a much better, well-rounded overview of your application while we wait the 3 to 4 weeks for those official scores. There is a 60-day waiting period between attempts to take the OAT. So that's something to be aware of when you're scheduling the exam. You kind of want to go ahead and build into your schedule if you're going to end up needing to take the exam more than once. That is why we definitely don't recommend that students take the OAT in, let's say, February, when the application deadline is March 1st, because if you end up needing to retake the OAT, that'll push your entire application back a year or more. So again, just things to be aware of when you're scheduling when to take the OAT. And as I mentioned earlier, if you need to take the OAT a fourth time, you will need kind of a special authorization for that attempt. We here at SCO, we do not accept scores older than 2 years. So again, all things to be aware of as you are putting your application together. And something that may offer a bit of comfort, 75 to 85% of students take the OAT only once. That is not all of them. You do not have to feel a great pressure to take the OAT only once. Many students are taking it twice. Many students are taking it 3 times. So if you do not earn the score that is your hope that first time around, that's okay. You can take it a second time. But also on the flip side, this is not the type of exam that you just keep taking and taking until you get the score you want. Try to be as prepared as possible when you go into that first exam, if it is your first time, just to ensure, give yourself at least the best chance possible of earning the best score the first time out the gate. Alrighty, so that brings us to the end of our webinar and a time for questions. So if you do have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat feature. There's also a Q&A feature that we can see questions in, and we'll be able to offer some additional advice. Alrighty, let's see. I'm taking the OAT mid-September. Do you think I would be able to complete the application by the end of September? Okay, so the advice here would be you can go ahead and have the rest of your application completed right now. If the only thing you'll be missing by the end of September is your OAT score, then I would advise going ahead and getting the rest of your application submitted and taken care of. That means your letters of recommendation, that means your transcripts, that means all of the personal experience, the work experience that's required on the OptumCast, go ahead and get that all taken care of while you're waiting to take the OAT. That means that as soon as your OAT score is ready, you can just submit it, hit send, and you won't have to worry about getting the rest of your application done by the end of September. It'll already be ready to go. That answers your question. Is the physics, algebra, or calculus based? Honestly, it varies. I've heard students say that their exam had algebra-based physics. I've heard students say that their exam had calculus-based physics. So it does vary. When I said earlier to study broadly, that's what I mean. You really cannot be assured of which one you're going to have from test to test. So try to have as broad of understanding as both forms of physics as possible. Let's see, where are we able to view the OAT testing dates? You will not be able to view the OAT testing dates until after you register to take the exam. Only then will you be able to see what available dates there are to select. Let's see, what does the application process look like for students who are retaking the OAT and have already submitted an application? Can interviews be offered prior to the new test score, or is the application on hold until the new test score is shared? Okay, wonderful question. So if you are retaking the OAT and reapplying to SCO, if your OAT score was a critical reason as to why you're retaking or reapplying, then we're probably going to wait until we have your new OAT score before inviting you for an interview as a applicant. So say, for example, if you're hoping for a higher OAT score than what you earned originally, then we're most likely going to see the comparison and wait to see what your new OAT score is before inviting you for an interview. But it does depend. As I said before, we're very holistic in our approach to reviewing applications. So it would be kind of a case-by-case basis. Say, for example, if your first OAT score was below a 300 or below a 290, then we're definitely going to be waiting for your new OAT score before inviting for an interview. But if your OAT score was a little bit higher, then it may be more of like a personal review. See, would you recommend spending more time studying for the OAT but then submitting your application later, or studying less so you can get your application in ASAP? Kind of along the same lines as what I mentioned earlier, I think you should be doing both at once. If you can, go ahead and get all of your materials together for your OptumCast application, things like your transcript, your letters of recommendation, filling out all of the dates and times and specifics that they ask for OptumCast. When talking about, like, say, your professional experience or extracurricular experience, you can accomplish that while studying for the OAT. So really, you should be trying to do both at once. I would not recommend waiting until you've taken the OAT to start on your OptumCast application. If at all possible, try to pull both together at the same time. So as I said earlier, when your OAT is done, you can hit submit and not have to delay your application any further. Would we need to do the supplemental application for SCO prior to being invited for an interview? Thank you for that question. Yes, the supplemental application is an official part of the application process here at SCO. If your supplemental application is not complete, for us, your application is not complete. So when working out kind of the list, if you're like me and you keep a giant Excel document with all of your different lists and goals, make sure the supplemental application is all on that list, because if it is not completed, then your application is not complete and we will not be able to invite you for an interview. Very often we've had students who will reach out saying, hey, I completed my OptumCast and my OAT 2 months ago and I haven't heard back. More often than not, we'll say, well, you didn't complete your supplemental application, so we can't invite you for an interview. So definitely be aware of the importance of the supplemental. Alrighty, what is the process of applying for in-state tuition or reduced out-of-state tuition while living in North Carolina? Well, SCO, we do not have in-state or out-of-state tuition as you might expect of, like, say, a private institution or a state institution. We have tuition. All students start with the same tuition amount. Now that tuition amount is going to change based on whether or not they're awarded scholarships, grants, or what we call regional contract seats. Regional contract seats are when a select number of states, usually states that do not have optometry schools already in their states, will pay a portion, even a majority of a student's tuition if that student is a permanent resident of that state. And that'll be applied towards your tuition amount, which may lower your tuition by different varying degrees. Excuse me. Now with North Carolina, let me just double check here. Just want to make sure I give you the most up-to-date number with what they're offering this year. Let's see. One moment, please, while I double check this. Please enjoy the soothing sounds of my dog panting. He's a Bernese Mountain Dog, so this heat is not fun for him at all. All right, there we go. So North Carolina offers a forgivable loan, which is up to $14,000 a year. If you are a permanent resident of that state and go through kind of the certification procedures and are awarded that forgivable loan. Now, with North Carolina, as with all of the other regional contract seats, those are very limited. They're first come, first serve. So we always recommend, if you know you'd be eligible for a regional contract seat, and you can see the full list of all the states we partner with on our website, please apply early. There's always a strong chance that even if you're a perfect candidate for a regional contract seat, if you wait too long to apply, then they'll all be awarded. And even again, if you're a perfect candidate, if we have none to award, then we have none to give you. So again, if you know you're eligible for a contract seat, try to apply as early in the cycle as possible. All right, then I have questions in the Q&A. Alrighty, I had considered taking the OAT the summer after my sophomore year, since I will have completed all the necessary coursework. I just wanted to make sure that this would fall in that 2-year time frame. Let's see. So if I'm understanding correctly, did you already take? Let's see. I'm for this person, I'm going to message you directly and ask that you email me, just so I can ask some follow-up questions, and ensure that maybe some other guests can ask their questions as well. But if you could email me, and I can follow up with maybe some more detail, because I do have some follow-up questions. Let's see. Any other questions? Oh, but I can answer this one. Where would the test scores be stored before I submit them to schools? They would be scored with the, I would say, not the facility, not the center, with ADA essentially, and then they'll be sent directly to schools via OptumCast. So you'll have no access to your official scores. I think you can maybe make a special request, but otherwise you would have no access to your official scores until that they are submitted via OptumCast and then sent out to schools. But you will have access to your unofficial scores, which pretty much are going to be your official scores. Your OAT scores have to go through kind of a verification process to ensure that there were no kind of technical mishandlings or anything that might have altered the scores technically, like a computer malfunction. So you can pretty much rest assured that your unofficial OAT scores are going to mirror your OAT scores exactly. So you shouldn't have too many concerns about there being any discrepancies there. Let's see. Are the interviews at SCO more holistic or academic review based? Certainly more holistic. That is not to say that we do not place any kind of regard on academic performance. As you could see by the OAT scores and average GPAs for our past entering classes, we do have consistently pretty higher performing students coming into optometry or coming into our optometry school, but that's certainly not the crux of what makes a good doctor. As so many of your professors will tell you on the first days at optometry school here at SCO, when your patients come in with an abscess or glasses that don't work or concerned about their cataract surgery results, they're not going to ask you what your GPA was. They're not going to ask if you were, valedictorian of your class. They're going to ask for your help. And really, no matter what your the finite elements of your academic performance are, you just need to be able to help your patient. So again, that's not to say that we don't place any value on academic performance. And you could see the kind of standards that we're looking for on a more general basis. But we do try to approach every application as holistically as possible. Let's see. Is June 26th the first opportunity to start filling out the application and getting it ready to submit? Yes, that is true. You won't be able to my current knowledge, you will not be able to create an OptumCast application for this cycle until after the June 26th date. That does not mean you can't start getting your materials together. It's very easy to find out what is asked of you on the OptumCast application, whether through a simple internet search or speaking with students who have applied for optometry school in the past. So I would recommend going ahead and starting to gather the documents, the information that you will need to complete your OptumCast before the opening day. That way, you can just have even more of a head start with getting your application done. I'm also from North Carolina. Where can I find the application to apply for the forgivable loans you're talking about? I would recommend checking out our website. Actually, if you just Google SCO regional contract seats, it will take you to a page listing all of the regional seats that we partner with and their officers. Each regional seat has an officer for that state who kind of oversees the process. And for North Carolina specifically, I can say while we're here, let's see, one moment. I don't want to take up too much time. I was trying to see if I could look up exactly who your officer would be. Definitely reach back out, and I can put my email here and I can offer you a little bit more insight to make sure I direct you to the right person to see or speak with. But also when you go through the application process, if you are ultimately awarded an application, then we will tell you, you are a good fit for the North Carolina regional contract seat, and then we'll give you definitely more information from there. Alrighty, any other questions? I'll give it just a couple more minutes. See a couple of people typing. Alrighty, are there any qualities of an applicant who stands out from others? Oh, excuse me, there was a question right before that I missed. When you say 3 months of studying, does that on average mean how many hours a day? That's going to really come down to your personal schedule. If you don't have 5 hours a day to study for the exam, don't try to build your study schedule around 5 hours a day. That may alter how many months you ultimately need. Like, say for example, if with the way your life schedule, your life routine is working out right now, you can only really give yourself 30 minutes a day to study for the OAT. That means you might need to give yourself 5 months to study for the OAT, just so you can make sure that you have that time that you'll have available set aside for OAT prep. More often than not, I've seen students give themselves maybe an hour a day to study, depending on their schedule. But then there are students who are studying for the exam in the middle of semesters. They don't have any coursework. So they may be able to dedicate, Lord of mercy, 5, 6, 7 hours a day to studying for the OAT, but that is a very, very rare situation. Is not specific to every student. So really take a look at your life overall and your schedule overall and what time you have available. It is best, like writing a book to study for the OAT every day, but you may have to alter based on your specific situation just how much time you give yourself every day to study, if that makes sense. Also, are there any qualities of an applicant who stands out from others? That is an interesting question because I wouldn't say there is any one box you can check off that will make you the standout applicant. Um, if I had to offer a more holistic response, I would say since we at SEO, we're a service-minded institution and we really aspire to give students the foundation that they need to go into any population, any community, and connect with patients and provide charitable and equitable care. If you are someone who wants to go into optometry because you want to help people, because you want to connect with people, because you feel like optometry is the best means by which you can make a difference in the lives of others, then that will come through in your application. That will come through in your, excuse me, that will come through in your interview. And it's important to really just be sincere about your interest in optometry. The more genuine it feels like your interest in the profession is, the more that's going to stand out for interviewers, counselors, things of that nature. So yes, that I know that may not be the most practical answer. It may not provide the most guidance on how to proceed, but truly, if optometry is a profession that you feel a calling towards, being able to express that, whether that is through your essay, whether that's through your application, whether that's through your interview, is really going to help you stand out overall as an applicant. All right, I may be able to do one more question. All righty then. Well, with that, I believe this brings us into the end of our webinar. Thank you all so much. I know we've covered a lot of information this evening, but I do hope that this webinar has been of assistance to you as you start on your optometric journey. The next webinar will be in August, and it will be an intro to SEO student organizations, where some of the presidents and representatives of our many student orgs will talk about, what makes our student orgs so exciting and interesting, and why so many students can get involved. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to request more information by signing up for our inquiry form. You'll receive a personal advisor and a personal brochure with information relevant to your goals and experiences. Thank you again to all the attendees who have joined us this evening. I hope to see you all at the next webinar, but in the meantime, have a great rest of your week and take care.